So what we've been talking about is God's people, some of God's people, in the period of kings and prophets, when they had kings and they had prophets. Now we've glanced at, what we've done is scanned and glanced at some of the people. We've been through three, and we're on our fourth one now. We're going to touch on another king for another reason, and I'll see why in just a second. It said, in the kings of Israel, Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, sat each on his throne, having put on their robes, in a void place in the entrance of the gate of Samaria. And all the prophets prophesied before them. 1 Kings 22 and 10. Now you remember, we just talked about Saul's anointing, and Saul was brought up and in. God isn't always pleased with everything that happens. So God was displeased with the reign that Saul had done, as Saul had gone. So he told Samuel to anoint another man as king over Israel. So Samuel went to Bethlehem, to the home of Jesse. Now make a note. In the Old Testament, here is Bethlehem being used to choose a king. There's going to be another king come from Bethlehem, but this first one is the first one in line. And afterwards, the other one is going to come after his type of reign. There will be other kings, but there will only be one other king after the reign of David. And Samuel went to Bethlehem to the home of Jesse. Now Jesse was a man who had several sons. From among these, a young man he expected to find a suitable person to anoint as the second king of the Jews. Now the Hebrew people were called Jews. They were Jewish people. They were set apart for God. God set them apart, gave them that name, Jew. That's where Jesus was going to come from also. So God had a plan, and that plan involved the Jewish race. 7 of Jesse's sons passed by Samuel, yet none of them seemed to be the one that God wanted to rule the Jews. So Samuel asked Jesse if he had still other sons. Upon learning that the youngest, David, was out in the field watching sheep, and he had Jesse to send for him. So David was ruddy, with beautiful eyes, very handsome young man. As Samuel gazed at him, the Lord said, "Arise, anoint him." Wow. So the command of God was, arise and anoint him, for this is he. Whew. That is a statement. When they say this is he, when God says this is he meant what he said. And David, if you please, was the forerunner in the Old Testament of Jesus Christ in the New Testament. And so in order to examine Jesse's sons, for among these young men, he expected to find a suitable person to anoint as the king of the Jews. And we saw that he did down here. So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed David in the presence of his brothers. Now David was not a disdain to become king of Israel immediately. This was not going to be an immediate thing. God has plans that he sets in motion long before they actually happen. And God knows the end from the beginning. So there were many experiences ahead of him before he would become ruler of his nation. Now, God had a plan. Here's this young man. He's out there tending sheep. And he's been anointed king. Wow. First, he was summoned to the court of King Saul to play the harp. Saul was subject to having fits and times of depression. And the music that had the power to calm and soothe him. David's heart playing caused Saul to become very fond of him. And during Saul's reign, the Philistines made war with the Israelites. Especially feared by the soldiers of Israel was the Philistine giant named Goliath. One day, Goliath was taunting the Israelites. David begged permission from Saul to go out and fight the giant. Even though David was still only a youth at this point in his life, Saul protested and feared for David's life. But David, remembering the experiences that he had survived as a shepherd, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of a lion and out of the paw of a bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. So then Saul said, go, and the Lord be with thee. So he took his sling and 5 smooth stones, and David went out to meet Goliath. Fitting a rock into his sling, he slung it at the giant. The rock struck Goliath in the forehead and killed him. It knocked him down, and David cut his head off. That was his final demise. But Goliath said something when David got out there. He said, am I like a dead dog that you would send a child out here to fight me? But God was with David. David became a famous and very popular warrior in the army of King Saul. This made Saul angry and jealous of David in time, and David had to flee from him for his life. Saul and his soldiers tried to capture David, but David always eluded them during this time. And then the prophet Samuel died. When Samuel died, war with the Philistines went on. Finally, on Mount Gilboa, the Philistines overtook Saul and his army and defeated them badly in the year 1004 BC. Saul's son, including David's good friend Jonathan, were all killed, and Saul, in despair, killed himself by falling on his sword. When David heard of Saul's death, he was filled with grief. This man was seeking out trying to kill him, and he was full of grief that Saul was killed. He would not even allow one of his soldiers, when he had the opportunity, to kill him. You need to read this story. I'm browsing a story here. I'm trying to build a bridge for you. This bridge I'm trying to build for you, and these 3 or 4 stories where Samson was restored and where Ruth and Boaz came out, and God's on the scene, and Samuel and Saul, and God's on the scene, and the great King David, and God's on the scene. I got one more after this. I want you to see God is always on the scene. It may not look like it on the surface, but he's there. And he's not in a hurry. He knows the end from the beginning. He knows what you need and what you don't need. Then David went to the town of Hebron in Judah, and the men of Judah anointed him as their king. Later, all the tribes of Israel came to David at Haran and anointed him king of Israel. David was 30 years old when he became king and reigned until 965 BC, before Christ. During that time, he unified his kingdom and ruled so well that for centuries afterward, the Jews looked back upon his reign as the golden age. Remember now, I said to you back in one of the other stories, one of the first stories, that David is the forerunner of Jesus Christ after that lineage. Now remember, they all come out of the lineage of Benjamin, and they're coming down through. And then so this is the story right here of David and Saul. Now, we're going to go to a place where Solomon, in Solomon's temple, makes a judgment. And let's look at that. It said, when David was old and death seemed near, he told Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet to anoint his son Solomon as king of Israel. So a large group of Israel went to Gihon with Solomon. And there Zadok the priest poured oil from the sacred horn on Solomon's head, and thus anointed him king. And this was in the year of 965 BC. This was an exciting moment. Trumpets were blowing. The people shouted, "God save the king, Solomon." And an amphitheater of great joy and privilege, and atmosphere of great joy and privilege. Now that his son Solomon was king, David could die with peace of mind. And also, last bit of fatherly advice for his son, David said, "I go the way of all the earth. Be thou strong, therefore, and show thyself a man, and keep the charge of the Lord thy God." Now, when he said he goes the way of all the earth, that hasn't changed. That has not changed. Man is born, his days are few and full of trouble on this earth, and he will die and go to the grave. He's going to go back to the ground of the earth. All of us are. To walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, and his commandments, and his judgments, and his testimonies. Then David died and was buried in Bethlehem, which is called the city of David, the same place that Jesus was and left from there. That's where they put him in the tomb, and he left the tomb instantly. You see, the veil was rent. The minute they put him in the tomb, the veil was rent. And when the veil was rent, that means that he went down through the veil, rent the veil, went down and preached to the captives in the center of the earth. Under Solomon's rule, the king was firmly established. Furthermore, he loved God and worshipped him with many sacrifices. One night when Solomon had gone to Gibeon to sacrifice, the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, "Ask what I shall give thee." Solomon replied, "Give thy servant understanding heart to judge the people, that I may discern between good and bad, or good and evil. For who is able to judge this, thy so great a people?" And the reply was pleasing to God, and he granted Solomon the wish for a wise and understanding heart. Wow. Be careful. Here God gave him a wise and understanding heart. But here again is the human being side of the man. Let things get in the way. Wow. One day, two women came to Solomon asking him to resolve a dispute over a child, each claimed as her own. The two women lived in the same house, and both gave birth to children during the same week. In the night, however, one of the mothers accidentally smothered her baby by rolling over on it in bed. And in desperation, she put the dead baby in the bed with the other woman while she slept, and took the live baby to be her own. Well, when the other mother awoke the next morning, she was horrified to find that the baby which was lying in her bed with her was dead. But upon looking at it more closely, she saw that it was not her child. And at that, she and other women had a furious argument, with each claiming the living baby was hers. Finally, they went before the king Solomon, asked that he judge between them. And So, Solomon, being the wisest man on earth, that God had given him wisdom, listen to his wisdom here. When Solomon had heard what the women had to say, he told one of his court attendants, "Bring me a sword." And when the sword had been brought unto the king's chamber, he ordered, "Divide the living child in two, and give half to one of the women and half to the other." What could anybody with human feelings propose such a cruel solution of the problem? Well, the true mother of the child cried out, "O Lord, give her the living child, and in no wise slay it." She would rather have her child alive than dead, even if it were reared by another woman. But the other woman was spiteful and totally lacking in love for the child. She said, "Let it be neither mine nor thine, but divide it." Then Solomon ordered that the child be given to the woman who wanted it to be kept alive, for she is the mother thereof. The beginning of Solomon's wisdom here. Read this book of Solomon. Read it and glean from it and see how Solomon led the people and how he was. And the word of Solomon's judgment in this case got around in Israel, and the people stood in awe of the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was truly in him, and that he would rule with justice. 1 Kings 1 through 11 to 328 was this story. And you need to look at that. Now, we see another person on the scene here. The next one is going to involve two men with pretty close to the same name. So we're not going to cover them right now. We're going to close this one and start a new one. So we'll see you next time. Right. Bye.